Many years ago, a great famine spread throughout the land, and at that time, the eldest son of every household was sent out in search of food, and instructed not to return until he had found something for the family to eat and drink. There was a certain young man among the Krachi whose responsibility it was to provide for the family, and so he wandered off in search of food, moving deeper and deeper into the bush every day, until he finally came to a spot he did not recognize. Just up ahead of him, he noticed a large form lying on the ground. He approached it cautiously, hoping that if the creature were dead, it might be a good source of food. But he had taken only a few steps forward when the mound began to stir, revealing that it was not an animal at all, but a ferocious-looking giant with flowing white hair stretched out for miles on the ground around him, all the way from Krachi to Salaga. The giant opened one eye and shouted at the young man to explain his presence. The boy stood absolutely terrified, yet after some minutes, he managed to blurt out that he had never intended to disturb the giant's rest, but had come a great distance in search of food. "I am Owo," said the giant, "but people also call me Death. You, my friend, have caught me in a good mood, and so I will give you some food and water if you will fetch and carry for me in return." The young man could scarcely believe his luck, and readily agreed to serve the giant in exchange for a few regular meals. Owo arose and walked towards his cave, where he began roasting some meat on a spit over the fire. Never before had the boy tasted such fine meal, and after he had washed it down with a bowl of fresh water, he sat back and smiled, well pleased that he had made the acquaintance of the giant. For a long time afterwards, the young man happily served Owo, and every evening, in return for his work, he was presented with a plate of the most delicious meat for his supper. But one day the boy awoke feeling terribly homesick, and begged his master to allow him to visit his family, if only for a few days. "You may visit your family for as long as you wish," said the giant, "on the condition that you bring another boy to replace you." So the young man returned to his village, where he told his family the whole story of his meeting with the giant. Eventually, he managed to persuade his younger brother to go with him into the bush, and here he handed him over to Owo, promising that he would himself return before too long. Several months had passed, and soon the young man grew hungry again and began to yearn for a taste of the meat the giant had cooked for him. Finally, he made up his mind to return to his master, and leaving his family behind, he returned to Owo's hut and knocked boldly on the door. The giant himself answered and asked the young man what he wanted. "I would like some more of the good meat you were once so generous to share with me," said the boy, hoping the giant would remember his face. "Very well," replied Owo. "You can have as much of it as you want, but you will have to work hard for me, as you did before." The young man consented, and after he had eaten as much as he could, he went about his chores enthusiastically. The work lasted many weeks, and every day the boy ate his fill of roasted meat. But to his surprise, he never saw anything of his brother, and whenever he asked about him, the giant told him, rather aloofly, that the lad had simply gone away on business. Once more, however, the young man grew homesick and asked Owo for permission to visit his village. The giant agreed on condition that this time he bring back a girl to carry out his duties while he was away. The young man hurried home, and there he pleaded with his sister to go into the bush and keep the giant company for a few months. The girl agreed, and after she had waved goodbye to her brother, she entered the giant's cave quite merrily, accompanied by a slave companion her own age. Only a short time had passed before the boy began to dream of the meat again, longing for even a small morsel of it. So he followed the familiar path through the bush until he found Owo's cave. The giant did not seem particularly pleased to see him, and grumbled loudly at the disturbance. But he pointed the way to a room at the back and told the boy to help himself to as much meat as he wanted. The young man took up a juicy bone which he began to devour, but to his horror, he recognized it at once as his sister's thigh, and as he looked more closely at all the rest of the meat, he was appalled to discover that he had been sitting there, happily chewing on the body of his sister and her slave girl. As fast as his legs could carry him, he raced back to the village and immediately confessed to the elders what he had done and the awful things he had seen. At once, the alarm was sounded, and all the people hurried out into the bush to investigate the giant's dwelling for themselves. But as they drew nearer, they became fearful of what he might do to them, and scurried back to the village to consult among themselves what steps should be taken. Eventually, it was agreed to go to Salaga, where they knew the giant's long hair came to an end, and set it alight. The chief of the village carried the torch, and when they were certain that the giant's hair was burning well, they returned to the bush, hid themselves in the undergrowth, and awaited the giant's reaction. Presently, Owo began to sweat and toss about inside his cave. The closer the flames moved towards him, the more he thrashed about and grumbled until, at last, he rushed outside, his head on fire, and fell down screaming in agony. The villagers approached him warily, and only the young man had the courage to venture close enough to see whether the giant was still breathing. And as he bent over the huge form, he noticed a bundle of medicine concealed in the roots of Owo's hair. Quickly he seized it and called to the others to come and see what he had found. The chief of the village examined the bundle, but no one could say what power the peculiar medicine might have. Then, one old man among the crowd suggested that no harm could be done if they took some of the medicine and sprinkled it on the bones and meat in the giant's hut. This was done, and to the delight of everyone gathered, the slave girl, her mistress, and the boy's brother returned to life at once. A small quantity of the medicine dust remained, but when the young man proposed that he should put it on the giant and restore him to life, there was a great uproar among the people. Yet the boy insisted that he should help the giant who had once helped him, and so the chief, by way of compromise, allowed him to sprinkle the leftover dust into the eye of the dead giant. The young man had no sooner done this when the giant's eye opened wide, causing the people to flee in great terror. But it is from this eye that death comes. For every time that Owo shuts that eye, a man dies, and unfortunately for mankind, he is forever blinking and winking, trying to clear the dust from his eye.